Hi, and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined by my good friend, Dr. Philip Chase.
Hello, everyone.
And we are going to do a spoiler-filled talk about Memories of Ice. Book 3 of Stephen Erikson's Malazan Book of the Fallen. If you haven't already seen it, there is a video of a spoiler-free version of this sort of discussion on Philip's channel. I will link it in the discussion or description below. So all go and see his channel, subscribe. His channel is absolutely brilliant and I love it. So thanks for joining me, Philip.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, AP. This is my favorite part of the month when we get to talk the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So thanks for having me.
This is great. So you did me the very gracious honor of letting me yammer on first in the sort of the spoiler-free thing. I got to unload all of my thoughts. What do you want to start with in the spoiler discussion of Memories of Ice?
Wow. Well, there are so many things we have to cover. Let's just dive right into some of these themes. One that really leaps out to me, and it doesn't take a genius to see it, but it's done so well, is motherhood. And we have the Maib, obviously, as a key character in this narrative, but you also have the matron, and you also have the Jagat mother in the preface. And oh boy, we got to talk about the prologue. We have to talk about that. But just, I guess, let's focus for a moment on motherhood and what is Erikson saying about motherhood in this story? Because, oh my goodness, this is powerful. I think one of the most primal, important relationships you have for most people is probably going to be with your mother. And there is something unique and obviously special about that bond. But what is not often acknowledged is the sacrifice involved, the bodily sacrifice, the psychological sacrifice involved in motherhood. And boy, does he not flinch from delving into this. It's just brilliant stuff. Do you agree?
And yeah, I think this is one of the major themes. And to be perfectly honest, I was going to do a whole video specifically on that topic, but we can talk about it now because this is the whole point of this spoiler-filled chat, that we don't need to go off and record something separate. So if we start with the Jagat mother,
yes,
in the prologue, because
yeah.
if I'm not going to be recording videos on motherhood and I'm not going to be recording videos in the prologue, we might as well do it now.
Well, you'll probably think of more to say, is my guess, and you'll be able to record those videos. I sure hope so.
But thinking specifically just in the prologue about the Jagat mother running from the Imas, the mortal Imas.
This is before the ritual, yeah.
And these are obviously very young children that she is carrying, and she's offered this chance by Olar Ithil. Hang on. Is it? Oh.
No, it's Kilava.
Kilava. Sorry, there's. I get certain names switched.
Yep. Yeah,
so
that's
Kilava,
understandable. Both bonecasters. Yeah.
So Tul's sister.
Yeah.
Offers to take the kids. So here we have this moment where a mother in a war, because Erikson complicates the notion of what war is, and it's actually very interesting. But
it is.
Here's this mother in a war, and her enemy is coming to her to say, I will save your kids, basically. And they hate each other. There's no, it's not that Kilava is looking at this Jagat mother and going, oh, poor you. But there's something in that moment where Kilava is there going, I can't save you, but maybe I can save your kids. And then we find out that Kilava had recently been either pregnant or given birth because she's lactating.
Yep.
But she doesn't have her child. So we have this element of children being ripped away from a mother. Yep. We have an element of a mother who has lost her child and is almost symbolically adopting two kids, all in one tiny section of the prologue.
Yep.
And then we don't need to talk about what she does with the kids because we'll come back to that in a different point, and it's not really part of motherhood. So then move on to the Maib. So what do you think of the Maib and what the Maib is sort of symbolizing?
So when I see the Maib and I look at the sacrifice that she made when she was young, and this happens in Gardens of the Moon, of course. She's a young woman and she's been asked to do this thing. And I don't think she fully understood what she was getting into. And that's kind of other, in Gardens of the Moon.
I know, but what parent ever fully understands what they're getting into?
Yeah, no, you sure don't. There is no instruction manual for this. And she agrees to do this thing, maybe out of compassion. But she births Silver Fox. And as you soon learn, Silver Fox is essentially a parasite on this woman. And that's kind of what children are in a way. They are, in a sense. I mean, it is the situation with Silver Fox is unique, for sure. As she ages, her mother ages. It's like her energy is coming from her mother, and she's aging rapidly as Silver Fox ages rapidly in order to fulfill her role, whatever it might be. And of course, the whole thing gets very, very powerful at the end when you realize what Silver Fox was trying to do all along. We'll have to talk about that too, but the Maib becomes bitter. She becomes angry. This is not our normal picture of motherhood. Isn't it isn't this bitterness, right? You're supposed to be happy, and if it's sacrificial, but you're supposed to love it because you love your kids and blah blah blah. Well, guess what, folks? Postpartum depression is a thing, and being a parent is hard. And there's this wonderful poem by Sylvia Plath called Metaphors, and it talks about, well, I won't give away what it is exactly, but if you want to read about pregnancy in a different light, check it out. But yeah, I mean, this aspect of motherhood isn't something that gets acknowledged a lot. The idea that it's wearing you down and it's aging you in a way that you would not have if you hadn't been a parent. So
I know, obviously, I'm not qualified to speak about what it's like to be a mother, and I am not pretending that I am qualified to speak about what it's like to be a mother. But this literalization of a metaphor for postpartum depression, for the fact that because one of the things we have to be very careful here is the Maib still loves Silver Fox. It is very clear that she does feel love, but over time, as she gets more and more drained, that love does start to turn to bitterness and to hatred. But Erikson is at
a feeling of abandonment. Yeah.
But Erikson is very much at pains at the very beginning to ensure that the reader is very aware that the Maib loves Silver Fox. And that although she knows that Silver Fox is this parasite, because a fetus is biologically a parasite, a baby is entirely dependent on you. And if you think of parents who have recently had children, the late nights, the early mornings, the interrupted sleep, the midnight feedings that have to happen, and walking around like a zombie, so tired. And in a lot of cultures, especially our own, a lot of that falls on the woman rather than the man. And here we have this being represented very literally, that Silver Fox, through her growth, is draining the very life from her mother. That she is sucking away the essence of who her mother is. And her mother has gone from a young, carefree, beautiful woman with her whole future ahead of her to suddenly going, all I am now is the vessel that bore you. And this is such a powerful aspect of the female experience that does not generally get reflected in fantasy literature.
True. Very true.
Now, there are lots of authors and novelists who have explored aspects of this. This is not to do disservice or to ignore any of them, but it is somewhat unexpected in a novel and in a series that is epic fantasy, that is frequently described as grimdark, that is frequently all about the military aspect or massive magical battles, that one of the key elements of this storyline is something that is so real about the relationship between mother and child and how it is not always perfect.
That's true. And I think to appreciate the beauty, you have to acknowledge the pain, and in an honest way. And I think that's something that's done really well here. Of course, another even more tragic vision of motherhood is the matron in here, which is you had that video about the horror aspects of the series. I think that this could fit in there, perhaps.
And one of the interesting things, before we get into actually all about the matron storyline,
right?
Just the visual of the matron sort of breaking talk.
Yeah.
If you remember, there was the film Alien Resurrection with Sigourney Weaver as a kind of half human, half alien hybrid, and then there was the alien hybrid, and then the other alien mother queen thing. It was all about different aspects of motherhood as symbolically represented in that. And then I think it was Winona Ryder was playing the synthetic, who is like the daughter of, or the version of Ripley's lost daughter, who was actually, Newt, who wasn't her biological daughter. The whole point of various female storytelling in that, of looking at that motherhood experience and all of the different ways that it works. Is it a good film? That is an entirely different story. But on this aspect of motherhood, when we have those scenes of this monstrous, alien, strange, non-mammalian mother wanting to love a child and having no children to love, it is contrasted so neatly with the Maib and Silver Fox, but it is just as destructive.
Yep. And it's tragic too. I mean, she is a tragic figure, no doubt, the matron. And poor Talk. Oh, I don't know if there's any character I would less rather be than Talk. And this, oh my goodness, dude, he gets put through the ringer. Oh man.
But to carry on, sorry about the matron for a second. I know it because she is Kachin Chamal, because she is non-mammalian, because she's not humanoid in the slightest. It's very difficult to humanize that. And yet Erikson manages to do this. Now, she's initially portrayed in that monstrous way, that monstrous alien. But when you're then reminded, how did she get there? She had originally been sealed in that rent.
Yes.
She had been tortured and in pain for centuries, for thousands of years. When she wakes up, she has been buried alive, and it takes her thousands of years to dig her way out. And by the time that she gets out, all of her children are dead. So she has been driven completely insane by pain, by loss, all of these things. And Erikson shows us those elements. And again, it's about that compassion. It's about, yes, she's alien. Yes, she's monstrous. Yes, she breaks Talk's bones and is really horrible and mean and nasty, and we don't like her. But dear God, is she a victim?
Yes. Yep. And this ties in very well. I don't know if you want to say anything else on the motherhood theme, but okay. Yeah. So this ties in really brilliantly with sacrifice, another prominent theme in here. One of the characters who, for me, is a standout in this book is certainly Ethovian. And just his whole arc, even the first time I read this one, it was a standout for me. The notion of sacrifice and redemption and all of this wrapped up, and in his character, it probably most represents it, I think, more than any other. In a almost, I mean, I don't know if Erikson set out to write like a Christ figure here, but maybe that's not the right way to put it. But Ethovian does take other people's pain and suffering and allows them to be redeemed. So what's your take on that?
Well, just to take a slight step back from Ethovian for a second and to think about the Grey Swords as a cult, as a mercenary unit. And my knowledge of the medieval period and the Middle Ages and the Crusades, very, very limited. So in my head, I'd always thought of them as like the Templars, the martial sort of religious order. But I was corrected recently, and someone had suggested, no, it's more like the Hospitaller.
Hospitallers, yes, yes, yeah.
So if you know slightly more about that, you might be able to explain it. But that's who they kind of were, and in my head, they are more of sort of slightly more caring than how the Templars were, or at least that's my imagination or my imagining of them. And Ethovian then, seeing the tripartite sort of structure of them, which in some ways can have this sort of mimicking of a particular Christian structure, but this idea of the head of the order, the heart of the order, the arm of the order. So I thought that was an interesting thing about this. But I think you're absolutely right that Ethovian, we could see it very much in terms of Christian teachings, mythology, or religion. But I think it goes beyond that. I think this is not a specific to that. I think to look at it that way, if that's how it makes sense to you, is absolutely fine. But this goes beyond that to what this is trying to teach us about us as humans and the limitless nature of true compassion.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's an important point about Ethovian's arc, that he is not some god figure. He is not some demigod or ascendant or he is someone, and he reaches out and absorbs the pain and suffering of so many and brings it into himself as a sacrifice for others to free them.
Yep. In fact, rather pointedly, he's been cut off from his God at this point. So, and the quote that I mentioned in our spoiler-free discussion that maybe if you'd indulge me here, I'll just read it from, it's near the end of the story, because you referenced the fact that compassion is something that shouldn't have strings tied to it. You know, it's not something that you offer with the expectation. It's something you offer freely. So what Ethovian says in this intense moment when he is, what's the right word here? Redeeming the Tlanimas. He is taking their pain, however you want to put it. That's just an incredible scene, by the way. So page 873, we humans do not understand compassion. In each moment of our lives, we betray it. We know of its worth, yet in knowing, we then attach to it a value. We guard the giving of it, believing it must be earned. Tlanimas, compassion is priceless in the truest sense of the word. It must be given freely in abundance. So there it is. There's Ethovian, and it's a powerful scene. Initially, you're kind of with the other characters like Silver Fox, who's like, oh no, Ethovian, no, not them, you know, we need them right now. But it's almost like he has no choice at this moment, right? I mean, he has to redeem these people he sees in pain.
And it is one of those fascinating things that we see examined in this book. The idea of, yes, we should do the right thing, but when it's convenient.
Yeah.
That, oh no, don't release the Talane. We need them. Well, okay, they can go off and do that, but don't do it for them because we need them now. I promise I will do it later. And and I think all of us in those moments where we see those arguments where they say, don't do it yet. Like, why can't they wait a week when we've finished doing this? And you go, because you know it'll be, well, can you wait another week? Because then we have to do that. Oh, and can you wait another week?
Yep.
We recognize these arguments all the time because we make these arguments all the time. We put off until tomorrow what should be done today. And that when we see someone like Ethovian, when it is not convenient, when it is not the strategic thing to do, when it is not the pragmatic thing to do, but it is absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah.
The strength to stand up, to do the right thing, even when it is inconvenient.
Yep.
And that is an incredibly difficult lesson for any of us to learn.
Yep.
And to see that on the page, one of the emotions, I will admit, is shame. The shame that I feel, because you think back to all those times and you go, oh, I definitely never did anything like that ever. I always did the right thing when it was the right thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
And it's that sort of level of introspection, awareness, of being able to use fiction, to use literature as a way to reevaluate yourself, your world. Like, this is the strength of good storytelling.
It is.
And this is not to gainsay anyone who goes, no, but I'm just in it for a good story. You go, that is absolutely fine. But I think one of the powers of good literature is it enables other people to have those moments.
Right.
Where it actually affects you, where it can make you think about the world differently.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Another powerful thing about these themes is how well Erikson links them all. So we talked about motherhood. We've talked about the idea of sacrifice and atonement and redemption. And this, again, goes back to another theme, which is memories. This very scene is pivotal in the unleashing of memories, which then get absorbed into the earth. And this is where the title of the book comes from, Memories of Ice. It's mentioned a few times in there, actually, if you're paying attention. I mean, the role of memories, the collective power of memories in this story is another thing that I deeply admire. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, and this is something, and again, it goes into both Erikson and Esselmont with their backgrounds in archaeology and anthropology.
Yeah.
And we have seen in previous novels within particularly Deadhouse Gates, we are the product of memory, our own personal memories, the cultural memory. Our cultures are shaped by memory. We are standing on land that is shaped by past events. The past is always with us. And if you recall Deadhouse Gates, that scene at the Oxbow crossing, where the ghosts of the past, the undead rise up and re-perform those rituals, and it's been linked into that moment.
Yeah.
Here we have, to start with, 300,000 years before this story starts is when this story starts, because and even then it's in media res. This is the 33rd Imas Jagat War. It's not the first.
Yeah.
This is the 33rd that they have been going on. They're mass extinction events. We've had glaciers that have been conjured and then been destroyed. We've had seas rise up and disappear. The land has been torn and shaped again and again and again by natural forces, unnatural forces, by the various peoples and races.
Yep.
And we get to this point where the Imas, who have sacrificed everything except existence, because they have gone from humans, well, alive with feelings, emotions, relationships, to becoming undead, cutting themselves off.
Yeah.
And all that they have then is this existence where they remember the things that happen, but memories are more than a visual record that plays behind your eyes. Right. Memories are the emotions. It's the feeling of your life.
Yes.
And in that, when there's a chance for them to recover those memories, to recover that life, and when you think of how long they've existed, how precious that gift is, and again, it's literalizing this metaphor, it's exaggerating it to such an extent that we cannot miss the message.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing stuff. And you think, okay, so the first bit of the prologue goes back 300,000 years. And by the way, there are references to whole races, the Kachin Kamal, that existed before that happened, that had already existed, flourished, and disappeared because of the war that we heard about between the short tails and the others. So, I mean, just the layers here are, it's one of the things I love about this series, and it helps me feel so invested in it and so immersed in it, is just this sense of history. But I love what he does with memories in here. And it's so crucial that in that scene where Ethovian is awakening them and reuniting them with their memories, we hear individual voices, right? We hear, individual stories, and they all get subsumed. They all get wrapped up together into this inexpressibly powerful, cohesive force that is just it's a moment of real pure redemption and beauty, and just love. Of course, a lot of things happen before we get there. We haven't talked about all the other stuff that happens first, and there the other prologue. Maybe since we started talking about the first part of the prologue, we should probably talk about the other prologue that happens 100,000 years before the main narrative, which involves the calling down of the crippled god and his crashing into the continent, and that was importantly an attempt on the part of these priests or whatever to fight against Kalor. Now, Kalor is a fellow who has a bit of a history here, I guess, in his role in all this, and then the elder gods attempting to put a stop to his mischief and the history between them. And that is an important thing to pay attention to, isn't it, in this prologue?
Yeah, and one of the things that's fascinating, obviously, the three elder gods reference, Draconis, Krull, and the sister of cold nights.
Yes.
And they curse Kalor. So what did Kalor actually do? Well, we're getting this story from their perspective, and we know that Erikson likes to play with unreliable narration. We know he likes to play with perspective. And we also know history is written by the victor. So is this exactly what happened, or is this a version of events? But they blame Kalor as emperor of this continent, and he for the crippled god being called down, and they've had to intervene.
Right.
This is the first explicit introduction and incorporation of the crippled god into the main narrative. Yeah. This is, and it's over the course of this book that we get the first hints that broken characters and hurt characters will be or can be the servants of the crippled god.
Like Gethel. Yeah.
But here we see these three elder gods passing judgment on Kalor because he has absolutely destroyed his entire empire. The entire continent has been razed, has been burnt to the ground.
Right.
And Krull takes it into himself to create a warren, and then suddenly we realize this is the creation of the Imperial Warren that we saw in book 1.
Yes.
We then hear about Kalor's curse on Draconis, saying that, you're going to be killed by, what you made. We saw Draconis in the sword.
Yep.
That we hear about, like Nightchill being cursed, and she gets torn apart by imperial demons.
Yeah, by betrayal. Yeah.
By betrayal. So everything about this, suddenly all of these moments, when you start thinking about the interconnectivity of those moments,
yeah,
in the reader's memory, because we were obviously just talking about memory, but in the reader's memory, connecting back to previous books, to previous events, to drawing the world in and going, no, everything is connected. There is this continuity. This world existed. These things happened. This is why they happened. And if you didn't know about Kalor being cursed, would you have really understood the ramifications of what happened to these people?
Yeah.
But it sets Kalor up as someone who wanted to be an ascendant, who wanted to be a god, who obviously had elements of not necessarily megalomania, but power. And he has been cursed to never succeed, but always go on. And Now imagine that for 100,000 years, that you can never attain your goal, and you cannot die, and you cannot just sort of give up, that you're just going to keep going, that you're fueled by this.
Yeah.
How bitter and twisted you must be. And then we see him in the camp with the other allies.
Yeah. I mean, of those curses, by far, the one I would least want is the one that Collar gets. I mean, that is the worst thing I can think of, is to have to live forever and never get what you want. I mean, that is just the textbook definition of a meaningless life in a way. And yeah, I think, he's just a,
well, maybe he wouldn't get what he wanted, but if he tried sometimes, he'd get what he needs.
God. Yeah. Speaking of Rolling Stones, he reminds me of the poor fellow. Was it Sisyphus? The
Sisyphus.
one that pushed the boulder up the hill and then back down again. That's poor Calor. Yeah.
But when we see Calor's reaction to Silver Fox,
yes,
and Calor hates this child, she is an abomination. So we can make the connection, obviously, to Frank Herbert's Dune and Alia, Paul Atreides' younger sister, who is an abomination, just as Paul as a chosen one, but not necessarily the way the Bene Gesserits had predicted, was a chosen one, but is also an abomination of a kind. So we can see Silver Fox almost as that sort of homage to the character of Alia from Dune. And Calor very much as the Baron Harkonnen going, this abomination. So you read it in that way and go, yeah, well, that makes sense. Here's this creepy tiny child who has like a tiny little children's voice, but going, oh yes, I have hundreds of thousands of years of experience. La, 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 la. And you go, that's just wrong. It is creepy. She is an abomination. And then we get a sense from the other characters when Rake reaches out his power to her and she just goes,
wow. Yeah.
That she is so powerful that one of the most powerful magic users we have met in the entire world, whose mere presence can make mages have a nosebleed, gets slapped aside by this child. And suddenly, Calor's fear of her is very, very understandable. Yeah. And then you add into that, hang on a sec, Night Chill, sister of cold nights.
Yeah, yeah.
And all of Calor's arguments, we go, hang on, this is just a personal grudge now.
Yeah.
And all of those things that we identified with and thought, actually, maybe suddenly, because we find this out, because we connected to the prologue, because we connected to a very personal revenge motive, we dismiss Calor's arguments.
Yeah, yeah.
But those arguments haven't changed. Those arguments should still worry us. But because we don't like Calor, because we don't like the fact that this is almost like a petty motive,
right?
We dismiss the really actual quite worrying things that he signifies that everyone else seems to ignore.
Well, it's interesting because that scene where Anamander Rake shows up, and that, by the way, that is one of the most badass scenes ever, where he arrives in his draconian form and he lands, and that scene makes a lot more sense in the context of what you're saying because of the near fight that happens between Anamander Rake and Kaladin Brood. And you think, these guys are bros, right? They're like best friends. What gives here? Were they actually going to fight each other? Well, the fact that Silver Fox presents such a threat makes that scene make a lot more sense, I think. If you're not understanding the depth of just how potentially scary she is, let that help you understand the fact that Anamander Rake and Kaladin Brood were about to disagree in a major way. I mean, that is a pretty cool scene overall, I would say. And
I think one of the things about Silver Fox and her level of power, I've heard it said rather flippantly that there's a very strange, almost inappropriate relationship, shall we say, between Perrin and Silver Fox. But I've always felt that while people use that as a kind of, they use the word as a shorthand for this, and why, oh, it feels really creepy because he's a grown man and she's a little tiny child. Right. And quite often people make comparisons to that really unpleasant moment in the Twilight series where the grown werewolf imprints on the little tiny baby, and they're going to be the love of each other's life from then on, but he's going to be like her dad for a... It don't read it. It is incredibly uncomfortable and horrible. But
you're not selling me on that series here.
But there have been issues where people have said, well, number one, the relationship that they talk about between Perrin and Tattersail, where did that come from? That's been blown out of all proportion. And then trying to make him go and have this tiny 6-year-old girl as his girlfriend, like, that's really creepy and weird. And I think I would suggest there are a couple of different ways of looking at this. Number one, when Perrin and Tattersail got together in Gardens of the Moon,
right,
they had an instant connection. They had this passionate connection. They were in full, they got married in a fever, Johnny Cash kind of way, that it was instant. This is a high emotional time. Tattersail has just lost her lover, her friends, a whole bunch of people that she knew. Yeah. She's just witnessed Hairlock been blown in half. All bad things that have happened. So it's a very high emotional time for her. Perrin, just back from the dead, a little bit traumatized. You know, things aren't quite normal for him. Yeah. And so they meet in this moment of intense stress, intense pressure, and they have this point of connection. But they never get a chance for it to fizzle out.
Right.
They never get a chance for it to go, that was a good weekend in Cabo, but real life is now intruding. They never had that. They were still in the midst of obsession, lust territory.
Yes.
And it's ripped apart.
Yeah.
What we then see is that was never resolved. They never had that point. And now both of them, thinking back on it, our memories turn previous relationships one way or another in our minds.
That's memories. Yep.
And for Perrin, looking back on this, and we see him go through this transition in the book. Erikson's very well aware of this, but the initial, he feels this for Tattersail. He's thinking about Tattersail, but he suddenly realizes, well, not suddenly, over time, he realizes Silver Fox is not Tattersail. And in fact, what I was feeling for Tattersail probably wasn't actual deep love. It wasn't a relationship. It was a fever. It was a passion, but not love. And that is slowly explored over time.
Yeah.
From Silver Fox's perspective, Tattersail is one of these souls inside her, one of these minds, these consciousnesses inside her. Right. And as a young child, as Silver Fox, the person, her mind has an elder god and 2 other high mages knocking around in there. She isn't getting a chance to come to the fore or to amalgamate them or to bring them together into a cohesive unit. So they're striving for dominance. So part of her mind is being taken over by Tattersail. And Tattersail is obviously, we get a sense that she is feeling this emotion because she had the passion and the fever, but never got a chance to resolve it. But slowly over time, Silver Fox realizes, no, that's not me. This relationship never happened between the 2 of us. I am remembering someone else's feelings. These are not mine.
Right.
And also, slowly we get a sense that those minds come together and form a distinct personality. So I don't think that relationship is quite how we normally use a shorthand to portray it. Yeah. And then one last point on this. Perrin is very, very reluctant to go anywhere near her. Whereas Whiskey Dak, Dujek, the others, they are pushing him because they are so frightened of Silver Fox's power.
Yes.
But they kind of trust Tattersail. Right. And if Tattersail can be brought to the fore, anything they can do to encourage that will be a good thing. And even if it's a very chaste relationship and they just hold hands, the fact if Perrin can encourage that and encourage a strengthening of Tattersail within her, that will be useful, a tool for the Malazans.
Yeah.
And that is an aspect of it where people tend to look at it and go, oh, but it's this older man and it's a kid, and Erikson was just being really creepy when he wrote this.
Right.
And I think, for me personally, I think that misses the point. This is not a Lolita situation.
No. In fact, I would say that who ends up being the most effective anchor for Silver Fox, you could argue, is Krupp. And I mean, he is not just the kindly uncle. He is this figure who was deeply involved in her birth, and he is directly tied to this. And he's an interesting character because, of course, we talked in the non-spoiler video about the comedic moments in here. Krupp is so great. I mean, he's the one who diffuses that near confrontation between Anomander Rake and Caladan Brood by hanging on to the table as it floats up in the air. He's the one who shows up. And I love this. You talked about the connections to the other books. This is just a great moment when Krupp shows up and Crone meets him, and Krupp calls her a dog. And Crone is a dog? And then, of course, Krupp is alluding to how Crone was transformed into a dog before by Baruch, right? Back in Gardens of the Moon, in sort of to disguise her. So we learned that he wasn't fooled, obviously. And then instead of calling her a dog, what does he do? He calls her a parrot. And then she goes, parrot? And he's like, exactly, they're perfect. Yeah. I mean, this sort of stuff, I love this character. I am so sold on Krupp in here. And I love the role he plays in trying to bring Silver Fox into her power in a responsible way. And so I don't know what you make of that, and of course, he's also concerned for the Maib. And he seems to be this, there are a few of these characters in here, but Krupp is special, isn't he?
Krupp, I think, is a singular human character in the entire Malazan world, that he exists both as part of that world, but is the one that can step outside it into, what maybe I would refer to as an extra diegetic level, that Krupp has this ability to move beyond the narrative that he is in. And he's the only of the mortal characters that can do this. Yeah. I think it's an authorial technique, it's a conceit of the writing and the fiction, but he works seamlessly within the world. There's a diegetic or a narrative reason for why he can do this. And I think that's important. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Almost like the bedknobs and broomstick escapade of him hanging off the table in a very slapstick way. We need to go back to talk about the table in a minute anyway. But on your point about Krupp, I think in some respects, he's the fairy godfather, obviously, to Silver Fox. He was there and part of and present at and involved in her creation. He feels in some way responsible. Yeah. But as this character who has his finger in every pie, who has everyone tied to all of these different strings, who is the ill, who is a genius level intellect, who's constantly manipulating people, but for their own good, heaven forfend that he ever became evil. An evil Krupp would be truly frightening.
Oh my, yeah.
He's clearly benevolent, and he is trying his best to be benevolent. And of all of the characters around Silver Fox, he is one of the very few who wants what is best for Silver Fox.
Yeah.
His agenda is Silver Fox.
Right.
Whereas Dujek and Whiskey Jack, their primary focus is, we need an ally.
Right.
Tattersail back. Or, well, Nightchill was always a bit scary and cruel and weird.
Yeah.
And that's another point to come back to about, you need to remind me about Subversion, Tayshrin, and Nightchill.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, because we find out something else about Pale that we didn't know about. So yeah, we have to return to that.
But Krupp is obviously very focused on being there for Silver Fox for her own sake. And it's the same for the Maib, that he cares about her. He knows the sacrifice that she has made. It pains him. And he wants to do what is best for her. And I think one of my, like, potentially almost a criticism of this is I can never figure out why Krupp and Silver Fox do not tell the Maib what they are trying to do. Because their stated reason is they don't want to frighten her. They don't want her to misunderstand. They don't want her to run away.
Right.
But that's exactly what she ends up doing. And then Cole and Murillo make it even worse by kidnapping her and running away. And so how could it have gone even worse if they had to? But I understand that characters, people we know, sometimes hold things back from us because they think it's for our own good.
They know best, yeah. And I think it's important too to recall that it is the dream world of Krupp that ultimately becomes the realm for the Beast Hold. This place of redemption for the Maib. It becomes a place for the two wolf gods, Tog and Thandaray, to be reunited. And so it is a place of redemption on many levels. And it all starts with Krupp. It's his dream world initially, which he gives over, I think, in some way or other to Silver Fox. Really cool stuff. And do you want to go right to that point you're about to make about what happens at Pale? We have a new perspective now, right?
But one minor digression. The table.
The table, yes, yeah.
The scene where the Marines steal Kaladin Brood's planning table, lug it all the way through. They go, right, we used to run this brilliant card game. Yeah. Okay, let's get it all set out. And it's like, who's going to, and obviously it's, Hedge isn't there anymore. It's, or who?
The guy who wears the hair shirt. He has to do it.
Mallet?
No, Mallet's the healer. Spindle.
Because he is an adept at the deck of dragons. So they start trying to, and then they lose all of their money and they can't figure out why.
Yeah.
Then we have Crone sneaking in. She looks up and goes, there's a giant card now underneath it, which has all of this massive repercussion for, what happens to Perrin becoming master of the deck.
Master of the deck. Yeah.
And, Perrin then comes along. Crone is drunk on the power associated with all of this, because obviously as a great raven, she's feeding off magic. So her being stunned and woozy from this gives us, the reader, an idea of how powerful it is.
Right.
Perrin turns up and goes, right, leave the table back.
Yeah.
But of course, very few of the Marines are there. So it's like, there aren't enough of them and it's going to take them even longer. And you just have this wonderful scene of comedy with this table. And then later on, the irregulars steal it.
Steal it back. Yeah, it's priceless. It's good stuff. But okay, so for all you Tayshren haters out there, we learned something in this story, and it's about Night Chill, and it's about what maybe really happened at Pale. And so did that change your perspective on Tayshren?
I still dislike him.
Okay. But he was actually
and this is an interesting thing, and just to talk about editing very, very briefly for a sec.
Okay.
Sometimes when an author introduces a character at the beginning of a novel, and they'll do a couple of things with that character, and I have said to them, right, I get what you're doing, but move those incidents or character traits to later on, because this is how you're establishing a character, and a reader is now going to go, this is what this character is like, and everything they do from this point on, they are going to judge through this lens.
Yeah.
For me, because of how Tayshren was represented in Gardens of the Moon, he will be forever tinted by a certain lens.
Yeah.
And what I loved about this, we talk so often about how Erikson subverts tropes, how he inverts various aspects of writing or the genre. He subverts our expectations. We have seen in a lot of film franchises and film series where they retcon, where they retroactively change something to now make it fit with what the new story is in the future because they've thought of something else.
That's not what this is, though.
That is not what this is.
Right.
Because here we suddenly get Taishrin did not deliberately kill the bridge burners.
Right.
He did not send those waves of energy in to collapse the tunnels. He thought he was saving them,
right,
by telling them to stay in the tunnels because they'd be protected from all of the sorcery.
Right.
That nearly broke me, finding that out from someone who I loathed, a character that I had built up this intense dislike for.
Right.
And we had that moment in Deadhouse Gates where the Empress and Kalam have their discussion, and it suddenly takes all of the venom and bile out of that exchange, and it subverts our expectations because the Empress isn't what we expect. We have the same thing happening here.
Yes.
Where Taishrin is not the villain that I thought he was.
And on top of that, we learned that A. Coronis, who was one of the other mages there at Pale, had been suspicious about Nightchill and some ambition of hers. And it turns out that Taishrin did not kill A. Coronis as previously thought. Nightchill killed A. Coronis in the midst of the battle, and Taishrin sent the demons to pull her apart in consequence of her betrayal there. So it wasn't just this straightforward, oh, Taishrin's a real douchebag who betrayed everybody. It was a lot more complicated. So yeah, and he was trying to save the bridge burners, as you say.
And so we find out that Nightchill, who we had thought was a victim, not only did we find out that she was an elder god, that she had her whole plan entirely. We already knew that. Do we actually know this yet?
Careful. So far, we've known everything you just said. So that's all revealed. Yeah.
About how the Emperor felt about Nightchill. Have we had that line in any of the books?
I don't think so. I think we can't go there just yet.
Because I can't remember where this line came from, and it's in my head. And I went, where do I know that from?
Yeah, we don't want to do any series spoilers. But...
Okay. But so we know that she was an elder god. We know that she had this whole plan to get at Rake, to get at Draconis's sword. We know that Draconis was actually like her brother in sense of being like an elder god.
Right.
That she didn't care about the human lives around her. She offed one of the other cadre because he was getting too close. Right. And is probably the one responsible for all of the waves of sorcery that ended up killing the bridge burners. She's the one we should have been hating. And she's in Silver Fox.
Yeah.
So it's finding all of this out. And you want to go, oh, but I really liked disliking Taishrin. He was easy to dislike.
Yeah, and on top of all that, AP, he is the one who succeeds at great personal price in preventing Kalor from killing Silver Fox. And he makes a sacrifice in that moment that is actually, pretty, even Corlat arrives. Of course, she's distraught because she sees Whiskey Jack is gone. I mean, this is a powerful moment. And she initially accuses Taishrin, oh, how come you waited until, and he's like bleeding from the fact that he had to open his warren and it's so poisoned by the crippled god. It was a real, challenge for him to act in that moment. So we just get a whole lot more understanding for this character, I think.
Yeah, and not only that, he acted as quickly as he could in the circumstance. It wasn't even that he paused and went, do I do this? It's like he tried to act immediately and wasn't fast enough.
Right.
And he is clearly upset by not having succeeded.
Right.
And I hate it when people take away the characters I love to hate.
That's Steven Erikson. You have to take it up with him.
And so, like, seeing that inversion of the reader expectations, connecting it again back to something that happened in Gardens of the Moon, and saying to the reader, remember, truth is perspective. This is a story told from multiple angles. You will never have the whole picture because No one has the whole picture.
Yeah.
And first impressions, second impressions, those are just impressions. You will never know the depth of the full character. You will never know the depth of everyone around you.
That's right.
People who you kind of misjudged may surprise you. People you trusted can betray you.
Yep. So in that context, I think we'd have to talk about the Panion seer and how the whole time, this whole story, he seems like the worst villain ever. I mean, he has basically established an empire that is not only destructive to people outside it, but it is rotting from within. It is literally, as it expands, it is dying inside. And it is the most hideous thing you can think of. It's a cancer in a way. And this guy is clearly lost it. But then again, at the end, you learn his story, and it gets a whole lot harder to just hate this character. It gets a little bit harder. I mean, yeah, he did some bad things, but look what was done to him. And also look at how he begins to redeem himself by fighting against the crippled god's influence on Byrne. And so it's tough, isn't it?
And remember, like, this again goes back to a scene that we saw in a previous book about what sealing a rent actually means.
Yeah.
Erikson introduced us to that in Deadhouse Gates. Now we see it happen again, and now we actually understand it a wee bit more. So that when it's presented here, we go, oh yeah, we know what this is. Oh, holy God, we know what this is.
Yeah.
We suddenly have an understanding for it. So something that seemed like an extraneous detail from a previous book has massive relevance here, because without that detail, this moment wouldn't have had the same resonance. It would have appeared to have been generated on the fly.
That's right.
And when we think then of, again, when we think of Fellison's journey in Deadhouse Gates, when we think of the Maib storyline here, where characters, through their suffering, can we really damn them for their actions? Should we not be much more understanding?
Yeah.
And when we look at a Jagat tyrant, because that is what he is. We know, again, what a Jagat tyrant is because of Rist. We see that, we are reminded of that. It is emphasized again in this book, in the prologue here, and then where Perrin goes.
Right.
And so we understand the threat that Panion actually represents.
Right.
But if you remember the sort of symbols discussing the empire, the Malazan empire in Deadhouse Gates, of it being hollow at the center and the flies, the priest of Hood.
Yeah.
This idea of insects and parasites and corruption, that was applied to the Malazan empire. But here we are seeing something, no, this is so much worse.
Right.
But at the same time, it is a literalized metaphor for what imperial conquest is. Conquest has to keep happening. Empires must continue to expand. Right. Because if they don't expand, if they aren't taking more territory, if they're not capturing more, they collapse. This has been exaggerated perhaps to the most absurd lengths to give us that literalized metaphor.
Right.
But then we find out that not only is this, why did the Jagat some of them turn into tyrants? Well, we know why Panion did.
Yeah.
200,000 years being tortured.
Yeah.
What would that do to your mind? What would that do to your soul? What would that do to any semblance and any form of empathy you had?
Yeah.
And we can understand his rage, his pain, his anger, his desire to destroy everything.
Yep. Yeah. And speaking of race, he even makes a cameo in here, and a funny one. I mean, I actually like Race when he shows up in the Zath. So it's crazy. But you know what we haven't even talked about yet is the two major epic battle things that happen here. We haven't talked about Capistan or Coral yet in any depth. So we probably should touch on those at least a bit. I mean, they are brilliantly done, and they are absolutely, these are of course, it happens over there's a certain buildup, right? We get build up, and then this thing starts, and in Capistan, for example, it begins, and there's this moment when it begins, and there's this chill that comes over you, and things are going to get nasty, and all kinds of players involved. You have Ethovian and the Grey Swords. Of course, you have Gruntle and his transformation going on there with Stunny. I mean, the relationship between Gruntle and Stunny is another favorite of mine in here, bickering couple. And his finally getting involved is because of what happens to Stunny. And that has some power, I think, to it. But you were going to say something.
Weirdly enough, no, this was published back in, it was about 2000, was it?
Let's see if I can find
it. 2001. So it was probably. So I think Steve probably wrote it in and around 1999. So that's 21, almost 22 years ago when say he was writing this.
Yeah.
I have an issue now from a modern perspective with how the world, how culture has changed over time, with this particular aspect of the Gruntle and the Stunny storyline. I hesitate to say, this is a negative criticism of Erikson's writing. I think we need to put it in the historical context. We need to also acknowledge that times have changed, awareness has changed. But when we have Gruntle basically facing a call to arms because his female friend has been raped, that felt to me, particularly how it was done here. Now, Erikson treats Stunny with enormous respect and sensitivity, and he does that with every sort of victim of this. But because we were locked into Gruntle's perspective of it, Gruntle was kind of, no, I don't really want to get involved. No, I'm not really. Oh, you raped my friend? Right, fine, let's go. And it reminded me that the expression used obviously in comic books is fridging, the girlfriend in the fridge, that it was using female rape as an active motivator for a male character. Now, I would not have objected to that back then if I had first read it in 2001. But I think times have moved on. We have seen this done so many times badly. We have seen it overused as a trope that now, reading it now, it is one of those things, and it's just because we're locked into Gruntle's perspective, and he is taciturn and that kind of macho, almost animalistic, and because of Trick, is becoming even more animal. That he has that visceral reaction of my possession or my thing. And then slightly after that, when he's looking at Stunny, he has an animal reaction to her and has to walk away before he does something. And both those moments felt really just in the modern day, I was no longer comfortable with. And they were weaknesses, I think, in that particular scene, that they were potentially weaknesses of that characterization. What do you think?
Point again. So the point just is that I'm wondering if you were an editor or advanced reader for somebody writing a similar kind of scene today, if it would be fine to have the motivation be a friend getting hurt and this becoming kind of personal for the character who finally gets a kick in the pants and becomes invested in this conflict. And so I think it's still, I don't have a problem personally with that happening. It's just that the way it's put in this particular example is that trope of female being violated and male feeling possessive about it and therefore finally getting invested in it. I see your point. I think it's a fair point.
It's not that I disagree with the fact that that Gruntle could feel motivated because something happened to his friend. There's no issue with that. It's just because this has become such an overused trope. Now, and that is not Erikson's fault. Like we are looking at a book that is 20 years old. but it has become such an overused trope. Times have changed in how this is looked at. So from a modern perspective, and remember, this is what, maybe 3 sentences in a book that's 1,200 pages long. Like,
it's a long book.
I don't want people to blow this out of all proportion, or to think that I'm making this massive statement about it, or, oh my God, all of Erikson's writing is like this. This is such a minor thing, but because Stunny is such an important character that for these scenes, and her reaction is so emotive. How Erikson treats that is so wonderfully done in terms of sensitivity to what she is going through, the anger, the pain, the self-blame. And we saw that with Fellowson. It's just that one, it strikes a slightly discordant note to then have this be the motivating factor for Gruntle. And when we see the child standard being raised, you go, that's the motivating factor. Now, the entire storyline with Stunny could have actually happened, and Gruntle found out about it later. There was no reason for this to be his motivating factor. A kid being ripped apart. I think any normal person would look at that and go, I was going to stand back. I was going to stand aside.
Right.
So, and that was all I wanted to raise about it, in that it, just from this perspective in the modern day, I don't think Erikson would write that scene the same way now.
Yeah. But the overall conflict there, and the way he turns all of this horror, I mean, this is awful stuff. There is major suffering here. And the Tenniscourie, I mean, what a thing. And the way Erikson succeeds, though, in turning this from terror and horror into grief, and then finally compassion, is what I deeply admire about this. And it's not just blood and guts for the sake of it. It is ultimately transformed in a very powerful way.
And certainly, like, even the survivors of the Tenniscourie, who become the new Grey Swords.
There you go.
I cannot think of another series where someone would take the half-mad cannibal barbarian horde and go, no, we're going to forgive them. They've been broken down. We're going, instead of destroying them and massacring them, because remember, they make that decision. They're looking at them going, should we just massacre them?
Yeah.
And it's no, because we are not the monsters. And I think that's a really important point. It was, they looked at it and went, we could just do that because how are we going to feed them? And but that's not who we are.
Makes you think about the power of redemption. And Whiskey Jack's death obviously is a very powerful moment in here. And there's a whole reaction of Corlat, which is heartrending, and the Malazans as a whole, and obviously the tribute to Ethovian as well. And that was a powerful moment when they're forming his mound with all the gifts, and just incredible stuff. But I'll tell you what got me the most was the remnants of the bridge burners at the end in Kroll's bar. And this feeling of, it's hard to describe it, but there's a wistfulness there. There's a sorrow there. Of course, there's guilt. There's survivor's guilt. There's all this. But what happened? Who's the guy who shows up there? Duiker. And this is a guy who's been through it, and you know it from Deadhouse Gates. And somehow or other, you know that they are going to help heal each other. That Duiker finally speaks in the moment when someone says, what's the point of telling the story anyway? And Duiker says, well, we've got to tell the story. We've got to tell the story. That's what it's all about. And here, let me tell you a story.
Let me break your hearts again.
Yeah. This is why we do it, though. This is why we tell stories. This is why we have literature. This is why we have books.
And, from a sort of technical point, the idea of bringing Duiker back, because we knew about the resurrection bottle.
Yeah.
but seeing him appear at the end again keeps there are all of these moments that tie in these narratives to each other. For people who think that, but this is all over here and this isn't connected to this and this was completely different, these are seamlessly woven together. Yeah. That they are not disparate, that they are not non-contiguous. Yeah. That there's a level of connectivity here that quite often is surprising in its complexity. But I think, again, when we had Duiker and his death, and the piece of cloth fell out with the unnamed Marine's name. And then in this book, we have Whiskey Jack died and the two female unnamed Marines.
Yes.
And we see, Whiskey Jack in a state of honor. We see Ethovian in a state of honor. But they also place those two Marines right up there on the dais with Whiskey Jack's corpse.
On Moonspawn, yeah.
And we think then of those soldiers who fall in battle, who never get recovered or are never found, or whose remains are never found, and that we have these monuments across the world to unknown soldiers.
Yes.
To the fallen who have disappeared, because we still honor them. And I like how in these moments, Erikson acknowledges that. But obviously in a book, in a narrative, it's very hard to do this, to have characters that are just unknown.
Right.
But he's been very careful to create certain characters that we don't get their names, but we see their loss.
Yeah. It's tremendous.
And I thought that point to the sort of the tomb of the unknown soldier, or the grave of the unknown soldier, was a nice point that we sometimes overlook, because we're so taken aback and affected by Whiskey Jack's death, because we are so moved by Ethovian and the creation of that burial mound.
Agreed.
That sometimes we overlook that powerful moment of, no, but these were two soldiers who never got the limelight, who didn't become the grand heroes in an epic, but they are remembered and honored.
Yeah. And they're great characters too, even though we never learn their names. The rapport between them and their loyalty, not only to Whiskey Jack, but obviously to Silver Fox, whom they see as Tattersail. It's special. It's really touching, and their sacrifice at the end. Beautiful stuff. And of course, on another level, you see it with the bridge burners who go in, first in, last out, right? I mean, that's what they're all about. And unfortunately, it's they get decimated as a result. I mean, it's really something. And
you've just said something that drives me absolutely insane.
Oh yeah?
Decimate, 1/10, decimate, decimal, 1/10, devastate, huge amount, devastate.
Oh
it's a
dear.
Different word.
Well, I don't know what the numbers are, if only 1/10 of them are left or not. Probably less even, actually. But they are devastated too. Yeah. So.
And to be perfectly honest, that is language is usage. Decimate now does have that meaning, but but it was one of those, because it was one of those facts about the Roman legion that someone had told me when I was a kid that always stuck with me, is that's where decimate came from.
Oh, that's where we get our 10, and decimal and all that. So I know that one, but we're using the word in its broader sense, AP, in its more liberal sense.
It's figurative sense.
Exactly.
Just like the word literal now also means figurative.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. I literally meant it that way.
But listen, Philip, I mean, we honestly could keep talking about this, because there's just so much here to unpack and discuss, but we've been going a long time, and I need to go to bed soon.
Yeah. And
so I wanted to thank you. This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. You've challenged my opinions on things, but shared so much about the book that I think I always learn and enjoy the book more after having these discussions with you. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Oh my goodness. I mean, right back at you. So yeah, I mean, this is the highlight. I read these books and I look so much forward to these conversations. And I hope that our listeners, viewers will feel a similar way because it certainly is special for me. So thank you, AP, for having me on your channel.
And I will link to your channel below. Thank you for once again appearing here, and have a great night.